Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I expect, to some of you. A very warm welcome to this webinar. We're very grateful to colleagues at the UN Statistics Division for bringing us all here and to participate in this really important conversation. My name is Claire Melamed, and I am the CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. We're a network, for those of you who don't know us, of around 700 organizations, including, I think, all of the speakers who will be speaking to us today. And we work very closely with the UN Statistics Division to try to join together the worlds of official statistics with the private sector, civil society, and all of the many other players in the data ecosystem. Really excited to be having this conversation today. It's absolutely central as we come up to the United Nations Statistics Commission in a few weeks, and of course to the big date on all of our calendars, the next World Data Forum in China at the end of April. Let me just very quickly say a few housekeeping words about the seminar, and then I will introduce the topic. So, of course, we have a fantastic list of speakers today. We're incredibly excited to hear from you all. There'll also be an opportunity for all of you in the audience to add your comments and questions via the chat, so please do so. And the team will then send the questions over to me and I will ask them on your behalf. So the chat function is critical to communicate during the webinar. We also be great to hear a bit more about all of you who are here. So if you can able to find the chat function as a bit of a practice for us all for asking questions later. It's, for those of you unfamiliar with Teams, it's the icon that looks a bit like a speech bubble. And just type in the country you're coming from, the sector you represent, anything else you'd like us to know about you. We're really keen to know who's in the audience, who we're talking to today, to make sure that the conversation is relevant for you all. So the main question that we are addressing today, since it was launched at the very first World Data Forum, it seems like a long time ago now in a somewhat different world, in 2017, the Cape Town Global Action Plan, or CTGAP, as we abbreviate it to, has been the organizing structure for coordinating our efforts. The world of data is many and varied. Lots of people are involved in many different kinds of important work on capacity development, analysis, resource mobilization, funding, policy work, and so on. And the CTGAP has been a really critical organizing framework to make sure that all of our efforts are pointing in the same direction and we can find each other and coordinate. Now, of course, the world of today is quite different to the world of 2017. We are now at in 2017, the Sustainable Development Goals had only just been agreed. They still felt fairly new. This year marks the midpoint of that agenda, and it is going to be the moment of focus on data. We in the data community will be held to account for the extent to which we collectively have enabled the world and the political leaders who signed the Sustainable Development Goals to track progress. And I think, while a huge amount of progress has been made, there are still some critical gaps that do mean that tracking some goals is still fairly difficult and very partial. So I think, we have to be prepared for that this year and think about how we're going to redouble our efforts for the second half of the SDG period. Of course, there have been many other changes. A growing focus on delivery of digital services in government has put the spotlight on data governance and accountability and making sure that data management systems are up to that job. And of course, we have a growing political interest in data, both through the G20 process in the Development Working Group, where the India presidency have made data a key part of their agenda for the G20, which is the first time that I can remember that we've had a political process focused squarely on data. All of these things represent a huge opportunity for us, and I think it's our responsibility and it's our job in this session to think about the extent to which the the extent to which the Cape Town Global Action Plan helps us to really be effective in organising ourselves to respond, to rise to these challenges and respond to these political moments, which present huge opportunities to overcome many of the barriers that we've been talking about since 2017, most notably in funding and resource mobilisation. But of course, we'll also put the spotlight on us in terms of our effectiveness, our responsiveness, and our ability to rise to the occasion. So before we kick off with the discussion, to give us the context and remind us all of what the Global Action Plan sets out, I'm really pleased to introduce Ola Awad, who I'm sure needs almost no introduction to most of you on the call. Ola is the president of the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics and co-chair of the high-level group for partnership, coordination and capacity building for statistics for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So who better to introduce to us the Cape Town Global Action Plan? Over to you, Ola.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. And I'm really pleased to join this important session, this important webinar. And I'm happy as the co-chair for the high-level group to give or to start by introducing a short brief. If we can go to the first slide, Ian. Thank you. So here I'd like to start by introducing a short brief on the history of the multiple declarations, as you can see, and closing statements adopted by the data ecosystem throughout the past few years. The Cape Town Global Action Plan for Sustainable Development, the CityGap, adopted by the UN Statistical Commission and welcomed by the UN General Assembly in 2017, identifies 6 main strategic areas that need strengthening and serves as a framework for investment. The Dubai Declaration, announced at the UN World Data Forum in 2018 and endorsed by the UN Statistical Commission as its 50th session in March 2019, calls for the establishment of a funding mechanism to mobilize domestic and international funds to strengthen the capacity of national data and statistical systems. The Dubai Declaration recognizes that innovative funding strategies are critical for successful implementation of the CityGap. The data community's response to COVID-19 was announced at the 2020 Virtual UN Data Forum, which was an acknowledgement that during the pandemic, the demand for data and statistics were greater than ever. The response appeals to the whole data community to come together to support the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and accelerate action on sustainable development goals. The Burn Data Compact for a decade of action on the Sustainable Development Goals was launched at the UN World Data Forum 2021 on the 6th October 2021 in Bern, Switzerland. This outcome document presents the data community with a call to action to develop data capacity, establish partnerships, produce data to leave no one behind, ensure data are presented in a timely, open, and impartial manner, and build trust. Can you move, Ian, to the second slide, please? Here, when we talk about how CityGap was operation, the global consensus on the need for smarter data investments was growing since the adoption of the CityGap. Over the course of 2021, the UN, World Bank, and Paris 21, have worked with global partners to design new financing instruments to support coordinated investments at scale, including the Clearinghouse, Complex Risk Analytics Fund, and the Global Data Facility, which all seeks to strengthening data systems and capacity in low and middle income countries. The system aimed to leverage support from across international organizations, including from the World Bank, IMF, and OECD, and catalyze domestic financing to strengthen the quality and sustainability of national and subnational data and statistical systems. And here I may say that there was also a survey which was actually circulated by Paris 21 to all countries, to all the national statistical offices, to define their main priorities and main financing needs. And we hope that, the results of the survey will be also presented. It was supposed to be presented today by Paris 21, but we have actually an issue that we are unable to present it, but at least it's important just to know that, there was so many, lots of work on identifying the main priorities of the countries and the financing needs, and there is real progress in that, and we hope that the results will be presented soon by Paris 21 to everyone. So I may mention that there was actually agreed principles to build on the existing plan of the city gap. Ian, can we go to the third slide, please? At its 25th meeting in February 2022 for the high-level group PCCB, established a subgroup tasked with working on a revision of the city gap to be developed over the next 2 years and presented in stages at the next 2 UN World Data Forum. The subgroup discussed the strategy and timeline for the revision process. There were 4 main points generated from this discussion. The global plan needs a new strategy to communicate clearly linked to more detailed plans at the regional and national level. Any new global plan needs to be outward looking to promote better partnerships, coordination, and capacity development efforts with more focus on the local and linked to the current policy context and multiple crises, and continue to be supported by periodic monitoring and evaluation of progress and lessons learned assessment. The revision should consider the important developments in the global data ecosystem and reflect the evolutions and changes in the strategic areas and actions. And there was actually, the subgroup has 3 main recommendations as stated in the slide. The first one, maintain the name. Cape Town Global Action Plan, since it has gained recognition with the community and is referenced in the General Assembly resolution on the SDG indicators for the 2030 agenda, but include the new introduction and background sessions. So there will be no changes on the name of the Cape Town Global Action Plan, and we're going to maintain the name. The other one is, the second one is maintain the scope, which represented by the 6 strategic areas, but simplify the framework by merging the strategic area 3, which was on the basic statistical activities and programs, within the strategic area 2 on innovation and modernization. So it was only about merging the strategic main areas together. And the third one was actually talking about reduce the levels in the existing structure, which developing a single list by priority areas based on a combination, the current objectives and key action, while also reflecting the current context in the global data ecosystem and in countries. So this is actually just an overview on the history of how the Cape Town Global Action Plan has been developed since we started in the first UN World Data Forum in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola, and thank you for that very helpful summary. I hope we can circulate the slides afterwards for those who want the very handy reference to the Cape Town Global Action Plan and its evolution. While we're talking about funding, let me also just mention some research that was commissioned to support this advocacy on financing, which estimated that for every $1 which is invested in data systems, governments and donors can expect a rate of return of around $32 for every dollar which is invested. And that obviously makes the case very strongly for all of us that these are systems well worth investing in and good value for money for governments and donors alike, who have, all of whom are facing very serious funding constraints at the moment. So now to kick off our discussion, let me introduce Gabriela Vukovic, who, as the president of the Hungarian Statistical Office, but the current chair of the UN Statistics Commission and a previous chair of the UN World Data Forum Programme Committee, so has really had a front row seat throughout the period of the evolution of the Cape Town Global Action Plan. Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. As Ola also mentioned, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Cape Town Global Action Plan, which was launched almost exactly 5 years ago on 18th January. So it was 5 years and 2 weeks ago at the World UN Data Forum in Cape Town, which was the first UN Data Forum. For me personally, both the first UN Data Forum and the birth of the Cape Town Global Action Plan were very exciting experiences. A lot of work also, but also very fulfilling because of the success, both of the Data Forum and of the CT Gap. The World Data Forum and the Global Action Plan were both conceived in response to the data revolution and the adoption of the SDGs. SDG monitoring became an important element of statistical programs all over the world. And while technical, technological, methodological advances open new perspectives for the production of statistics and data, important data and capacity gaps surfaced almost immediately. The Cape Town Global Action Plan, Nomen est Omen, seeks addressing, among others, those gaps that do exist in data and in monitoring data, and to help overcome the monitoring and policy deficiencies, thereby strengthening the global, regional, and national statistical systems. In this perspective, the Cape Town Global Action Plan is obviously a core document for developing and developed countries likewise, as data information gaps and exist all over the world. And capacity building has become one of the priority development areas in all statistical systems. The Global Action Plan draws attention to the interlinkages between economic, social, and environmental domains of statistics. And it is therefore a useful background for modernizing the whole statistical system, not only the production of national, regional, and global SDG indicators. It also recognizes that the efforts of official statistics are not sufficient to produce monitoring inputs for tracking progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Many other players in the data ecosystem can complement the information provided by national statistical systems, and the collaboration, or let us call it partnerships, as it is called in the document, between statistics and the broader data ecosystem are crucial. Crucial for bridging the data gaps, but also in accelerating capacity building in national statistical systems through the exchange of good practices and through collaborative efforts that eventually are to the benefit of all stakeholders, not only to the statistics and data partners. In this respect, I would like to specifically mention that the traditional partners of statisticians are academia and the public sector. But in the evolving data landscape, mutually beneficial partnerships with businesses and civil organizations became crucial and proved to be really fruitful over the past few years. Beyond professional cooperation, some of these businesses and civil partners can also contribute to the financial resources devoted to the development of statistical systems, while the responsibility of providing sufficient resources lies mainly with the national governments, obviously. To conclude, I want to be brief to give sufficient time for other discussions. To conclude, the evolution of the data landscape and is even faster now than it was at the time of the adoption of the Cape Town Global Action Plan. The production and the availability of data became even more important during the recent crisis situations that we experienced and are still experiencing. And the need to fulfill user needs by high quality, timely, and trustworthy data became more urgent than ever. The Cape Town Global Action Plan and the subsequent documents, which also Ola referred to, and programs including financing programs, need to be more assertive in the future and more focused on our current than our current frameworks are, to enable the statistical systems to create forward-looking modernization programs rather than only responding to changes in user needs and in the data landscape. So the efforts that are undertaken in order to move beyond the Cape Town Global Action Plan, or move the content of the Cape Town Global Action Plan beyond its current content, I think it's very important. It's very important, and I'm sure that it will be as useful as the Cape Town Global Action Plan itself was when it was born, and for quite a few years afterwards also. Thank you for your attention, and of course, I hope the discussion will come back to me also.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And I think as two words to guide our sort of what we want in the future, if you could just possibly mute yourself, thank you. Assertive and focused, I think, are two excellent words to pick up from what you have said to guide us into the future. Very happy now to introduce Professor Samuel Anim, who, again, I'm sure is well known to many of you, the Director General of the Ghana Statistical Service. And I think one of those has really led one of the statistical offices which has most eagerly embraced the opportunities of innovation, of modernization, but of doing so in a region which is also at the center of rapidly growing data and statistics infrastructure and capability. So, Professor Anim, over to you, and eager to hear how the Cape Town Global Action Plan has been helpful in your work and what changes you'd like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and my regards to colleagues, and thank you for giving Ghana the opportunity to share its thoughts on how Ghana has utilized the Cape Town Global Action Plan. Let me really say that we have relied on quite a number of documents in shaping what we do at Ghana Statistical Service, obviously one of which is the Cape Town Global Action Plan. But it's always important to look at how this document relates to other documents, i.e. all the documents surrounding the data revolution that occurred ahead of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in most recent times, the Data for Better Lives document that was produced for the 2021 World Development Report. As you rightly said, Claire, Ghana Statistical Service, and for that matter, a number of NSOs on the continent are currently at a stage where they have a lot of data, and the data is not from one source. As we all know, we're getting data from quite a number of non-traditional sources. So going forward, our challenge really is how to deepen the utilization, the stewardship, and the governance side of data. And that is where I think the conversation should go. Two things that I really want us to reflect on as far as the CT gap is concerned is, one, what I call pathways for contextualizing the Cape Town Global Action Plan. It is a bit at a broad level. I know we keep having conversations on how deep the document can go in terms of lower level discussions, but at a minimum, what we can do is to point to pathways for contextualization. And what makes this very important for the African continent is that although we're talking about coordination, the issue of harmonization and partnership on the continent is pretty weak, especially given the Francophone, Anglophone divide in terms of who sort of oversees data production on the continent. So my position is for us to begin to think about how we can contextualize or how we can provide pathways for contextualizing what the Global Action Plan seeks to do. The second thing that I want to talk about, which I've mentioned a couple of times, is the whole idea of going beyond capacity building. And what I mean by going beyond capacity building is that we rush into thinking about capacity building resolution from a training point of view. But really what is happening in an era of data production is for us to think about the whole statistical activities value chain. Yes, it's easy to talk about issues focusing on production, issues focusing on use, but if you think about it from a value chain perspective, capacity building will think about how to link the production to the utilization rather than seeing them as silos. So two issues in there is the value chain that we need to think about and the argument of going beyond the capacity building from a training perspective. I'll pause here. Definitely, there are other issues that I want to share, and I'm happy to come back. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Professor. Really interesting, and I think, you know, really helpful to give us that very practical, operational set of criteria there to add to Gabriella's imploring us to be assertive and to be focused and think big. I think the focus also on really making sure that this does the job that we need it to do in operational terms and thinking about pathways. And I love your point about capacity building, which obviously has increasingly become the answer to every question in our sector. So I think you're absolutely right. It's really important to think about that very practically in terms of the outcome that we want to see. Thank you so much. So now let me turn to Diana Castillo-Trejo. I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the Acting Director General of the Statistical Institute of Belize and also a member of the High-Level Group for Partnership, Coordination and Capacity Building for Statistics. And Diana, I'm really keen to hear from you, particularly as the newer head of an NSO and a member of the HLG, to really understand the extent to which the CT gap is helpful in confronting the challenges that you are managing now in Belize and as you are involved in the global effort through your membership of the HLG. Over to you, Diana.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Claire, and thank you to the organizers of this side event for the opportunity to be here and share my perspectives on the Cape Town Global Action Plan. As a newer head of an NSO, as you said, Claire, especially in a small developing country such as Belize, where the work of organizing and strengthening our national statistical system really only began in earnest a few years ago. The magnitude of the work that remains to be done for NSS to be able to fully carry out its functions can be daunting, you can imagine. However, as a member of the HLG PCCB, I have had the opportunity to not only review the action plan in detail, but to engage in discussions about its merits and shortcomings with other members of this group, who represent countries from the very large and advanced to the very small and developing like mine. And given this context, the CT gap is, from my perspective, a comprehensive strategy document that provides clear direction for how to strengthen NSOs and NSSs, especially for countries like mine. The Statistical Institute of Belize finds itself more and more facing increased demand for data, not just for SDG monitoring, but also for monitoring our own national development goals and supporting evidence-based decision-making. And as a small organization, these increasing demands won't be met without a coordinated and functional NSS that's fully engaged in the provision of the data that are needed by our data users. And we find that the more we seek to engage our partners in the NSS, the more it becomes clear that support is needed and capacity must be built. You said it, capacity building is the key. across our entire system in order for it to achieve the levels of coordination and functionality that are required of it. In this regard, the CT GAP provides guidance for strengthening the NSO's coordination capacities with actions that address issues of legislative and regulatory frameworks, data sharing standards, and stakeholder collaboration, for example. It also addresses issues related to improving the quality of existing statistical programs and expanding the scope of statistics being produced with a focus on SDG monitoring and thematic areas in which there is a clear lack of available data. It speaks as well to the adoption of new technologies and securing new and non-traditional data sources. These actions all have the potential to greatly strengthen my NSO in its role as Chief Data Provider and NSS Coordinator, as well as our line ministries and departments within the NSS, so that they are not only tasked with new and expanded data provision responsibilities, but are also given the tools that they need to meet these new responsibilities effectively. In short, although the CT GAP was developed 5 years ago, pre-pandemic and pre the new normal in which we operate, from my perspective, it's still a relevant tool to support overall strengthening of NSSs and NSOs across various key dimensions and provides valuable guidance to countries such as mine, for which this type of strengthening and capacity building has become a matter of urgency. As my country enters a period of strategic planning, where both my NSO strategic plan and or NSDS are due to be updated, I want to see the CT GAP serve as a chief guiding document for this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really helpful. This is the moment now to ask a few questions to this part of the panel. So if any of you in the audience are pondering any questions you'd like to ask or any additional information, now is your moment to put a comment in the chat. But from my side, let me just start with one question that I'd love to hear from all three of you, from Gabriella, from Samuel, and from Diana. Obviously, I'm sure that as heads of statistics offices in your respective countries, you are all faced with a whole range of different strategies and plans that you are required to accommodate. You have your own national strategies for the development of statistics. Those of you that have those, perhaps you're in a context where the government also has a broader data strategy. Perhaps you're also faced with governments that have their own political strategies and priorities. There's no shortage of, at the national level, of strategies and frameworks within which you're required to fit your planning and be accountable for the use of resources in your own institutions. So my question is, what is the value in that context of a global action plan? And I would love to hear from any of you if you have any specific stories to share or examples of where the Cape Town Global Action Plan was specifically useful to you in mediating these different strategies or enabling something to happen or enabling you to get something done. And alternatively, if that hasn't been the case, it would be interesting to speculate on why not and whether a different kind of global framework could be more useful. But I want us to be really practical here and think about specifically in your job, what has the Cape Town Global Action Plan actually done for you, made easier for you? I don't mind in what order we answer. Gabriella, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Well, actually, I think any global plan, any global action plan, strategic plan, or even a working document at a global level is always useful for all statistical offices. First of all, because it shows that we are not alone. Our problems are not only relevant for us. Most of our problems we share most of our problems with other national statistical systems or offices. So that is one point. But also it provides, or it at least offers, solutions. And that is also helpful always, because we are all very clever, of course, and we are all very experienced, and we have all kinds of brilliant ideas about how to go forward and how to formulate our own strategies. But if you get some guidance or some streamlining of what can be done, what should be done, what other countries are doing, that always helps in focusing, I like the word also, focusing our thinking to the future, to the current situation, and also to the current possibilities or opportunities that there are that we can see. So I think any global document of this kind of strategic level is always useful for everybody, and I would say also for our governments, because all the governments also know about the global strategies that exist, not only in statistics, of course, but in data or in other areas, and they can also sort of relate to those and streamline some of the activities or some of the plans along those lines.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Samuel, over to you.
Thank you, Claire, once again for the opportunity. I really want us to start from the point of view of how policymakers in developing countries react to issues. And my view is that they are more reactive given the challenges that they face, rather than having the luxury of time to say that we're going to plan, so this is what we're going to do in X number of years. So for that purpose, if you are going to them with a global document, the first question that they would ask you is, are we obliged to do it, or it's a reference document? And indeed, I mean, as we all would know, the Global Action Plan is a reference document. So what we have done at Ghana Statistical Service is to try and preempt and try and do certain things that would oblige them to use our products when the need arises. So a couple of things just for our guidance. We have just approached the Office of the Presidency, working towards declaring this year as a data revolution year. And why we are doing that is to draw on the pillars of how we can strengthen, as I said earlier, on the value chain of the statistical activities, especially on the statistics and the policy side. So our data revolution policy will be focusing on 3 strands. 1 is protection in terms of the subject, 2 would be the statistics, how we produce it, and 3 will be the policy. And the whole idea is to go ahead with strengthening that value chain that I talked about. And then this whole issue about the overload of data that we see. What we've done is to develop roadmaps on all these integrations that we want to do. So we have a roadmap for integration of data science, roadmap of integration of geospatial resources, roadmap for integration of big data, administrative data, and we are bringing the policymakers right on board to own these roadmaps. So subsequently, once we are sharing statistics on the same variable from different sources, they know ahead of time what these things are. So my point is that, yes, they're going to see it as a reference document, but what we have to do as National Statistical Office is to think ahead, preempt, and get them involved before the need for these documents or statistics arise. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As always, so incredibly politically astute and strategic. Thank you. Deanna.
Okay, thanks. Well, as I said, from my perspective, I think that strategy documents, and this document in particular, because I think it's particularly well composed and particularly relevant, but they serve to provide a focus. You know, yes, there are many plans and strategies that we need to be a part of, we need to align ourselves with, but this one in particular, I think, provides a good point of focus on the overarching issues, because what is our core function? Our core function is to provide that data or facilitate the provision of the data that's needed across these various, you know, not just statistical action plans and statistical roadmaps, but national development plans and sector-specific development plans. Our chief role here is to ensure that there is good quality data, timely data, relevant data, for the proper decisions to be made to guide the implementation of these plans. And so an action plan like the CT GAP then provides us with a point of focus where we can take a step back and look at how is it that we can best fulfill this function? What are the areas that we need to strengthen to be able to fully carry out this particular mandate? And as I said, I think that the themes covered, the strategic areas covered under the CT gap are universally applicable. I think even 5 years later, most of us can look at those strategic priorities and see that they are still very important and still areas that we all need to address and continue working on. In my country specifically, my government recently launched our medium-term development strategy, our national development strategy. And there has been a push on the part of the government to promote and to move more towards data-driven decision-making. And so my institution then is going to be called upon to provide data to guide implementation along the way, and to provide data for monitoring the plan and the implementation of that development strategy. So again, take a step back and look at how my institution and the NSS here in Belize can best carry out its functions. What is it that we need to strengthen to do this properly? And I think the CT gap provides an excellent starting point for that. So yeah, I feel like at that level is absolutely relevant and absolutely an essential tool for us.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I mean, I think all three of you have given really insightful responses to the question of, excuse me, of what the CT gap is for. And I think, you know, respectively discuss the importance of the plan in enabling you to prioritize between your many different competing demands, the helping to validate your own choices and provide the kind of reassurance of a common framework. And then, of course, as we heard from Professor Nim, also really helping to be a structure within which to translate these broad global priorities into very focused political strategies at the national level. So I think that was a really helpful tour through for our colleagues here from national statistical offices, what it is that the Cape Town Global Action Plan can do to facilitate your work, to help to pursue the objectives of national statistics offices and the global statistical system in general. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn to the next panel now. There may be opportunities to bring in some of you from our first panel as we go through questions towards the end of the seminar. I certainly would be keen to hear more. But for now, I also want to turn to a second panel in our webinar, and really think about some of the actors within the data system who sit outside of national statistics offices, and really hear from some of the other actors how the Cape Town Global Action Plan can be useful to you and the job that it does in the context of the work that you do to support statistics offices and the data system more broadly, globally and internationally. So let me first, we've heard quite a lot already about resources and the importance of raising resources for data systems, both from domestic sources, from donors and other partners. So let me first turn to Andrea Rees, who is the Senior Advisor for Development Effectiveness at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Of course, the Swiss government were our generous hosts for a previous World Data Forum. And of course, in that capacity as a member of the UN World Data Forum Programme Committee. So Andrea, 4 minutes. Let me remind you all, please, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have also hosted another big event recently in Geneva, and that was actually dedicated at effective development cooperation and brought together sort of the development community. And so I would like to give some reflection what the Global Action Plan, the Cape Town Global Action Plan means or could mean for the development community. And unfortunately, I must say, we tried very much to push data issues in that conference, and we're still doing that. I think it has become again sort of surfaced again in the development community as something important. But having said that, 5 years after the Global Action Plan was launched, my observation is that it has sort of little understanding and a little traction in the development community. And that's unfortunate, because obviously we do need ODA investment if we want to achieve some of the big issues. So the development community is active in the data field, particularly also now with the sort of mounting crisis and the recognitions of the importance of data. It's also a user, but also producer and supporter of data. But actually, there is little understanding what the systemic background of that is. And actually, the Cape Town Global Action Plan exactly provides that, to understand the data system and the way to produce it, and the roles of different actors. And I must say there is little sort of understanding in the development community of that, and little sort of knowledge that such, kind of plan exists. And it's not only unfortunate because we do need ODA investment in core issues related to the Global Action Plan, but also because if there is a lack of understanding of sort of the systemic angle of data production, we have now sort of a lot of, as you said, Claire, at the beginning, we have now a growing amount of different actors who are data producers, but to some extent also users, and an increasing fragmentation of the data landscape. So I think in the recent years, and you, Ola, you pointed out to some of those implementation instruments, we have some elements like the Bern network, who tries to bring together the development community and the statistical community, the clearinghouse sort of as a practical matching matching agency, or the trust funds, the various trust funds to facilitate joint investment. So we have increasingly practical ways to actually bring those two communities together and act together. But I think there's still more to be done. And I guess in revising the Global Action Plan, it's maybe important to really see its two functions. On one hand, it's I'm talking to you as sort of the statistical community, your master plan of action at the global level, your global reference document. But on the other hand, I think it's important to speak to the community beyond the statistical community, and namely also development community, and sort of help them to understand what are the sort of trigger point and really strategic ways to invest, rather than become sort of an additional data producer in a fragmented data landscape. So I guess if we move forward, I think we have to also look at that outward function and the capacity to bring in other communities, and also make understood what the complexity does, but also where the strategic investments could be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Really helpful. And I mean, I think if I can, sorry, could you just mute your microphone? I'm getting a bit of feedback, sorry. If I can possibly paraphrase what you said, I think your point about the Cape Town Global Action Plan having two functions, one to organise inside the community and one to project outwards. I may be right. One thing I'm picking up, I think, from the presentations thus far is that it has succeeded quite well in the first role, but perhaps somewhat less well, as you've just said, Andrea, in the second. So I think that is, again, something for us to reflect on as a community. Does that matter? Does it need to do both? If it does, what are the trade-offs between the two? And how do we manage those competing or those sort of different demands that we might make of a single framework? I think that's something perhaps to take into consideration in the discussion and for the HLG in the revisions that follow. Thank you. We're going to have time for questions if anyone wants to pick up any of the points that Andrea's just made. So let me now turn to Charles Kimpolo. Delighted to have you with us. Charles is the Director of the Industry Initiative and Acting Director of the Skills for Employability and Head of the Next Einstein Forum at the Global Network Secretariat of the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, AIMS, as many of you will know it as. Long-time partner and friend of this this agenda. And here, I think really keen to hear from you, Charles, as somebody whose focus, as well as statistics, is also on the big and exciting world that lies beyond statistics in terms of data science, AI, and so on, and really thinking about what is the value of the Cape Town Global Action Plan in helping to dock these different worlds together and to enable different communities to work together. So over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. It's also a pleasure to be part of this conversation. By the way, I'm enjoying it because the previous speaker really made very good points. So yes, I think this city gap started in Cape Town. EMS also was born in Cape Town. Is it a coincidence? So what we're doing at EMS is really three things, which is one, trying to accelerate training program in postgraduate training program in mathematical sciences, research and innovation, and public engagement. I think the document is very well designed. It's a very solid framework. You have everything, all the ingredients that you need. I like the A in the framework because that is action. Because most of the plan would not give you an opportunity to say this is the action that you need to actually take forward. So from EM's perspective, I've just picked the strategic areas. I think there are 5. Ola was trying to explain to us moving from 6 to 5. For us at EMS, innovation and modernization of national statistical system is quite important because, one, for the data revolution, because we're looking beyond statistics. I think Prof. Samuel was talking about big data, non-traditional source of data. I think if we really wanted to achieve the sustainable development goals, we need to put in place of work around beyond statistics. So that is very important for us. The second one is the multi-stakeholder partnership for sustainable development data. This is what I always believe, that sustainable development is everyone's business, is our common purpose. Everyone wants to contribute, everyone needs to act. And for us to achieve what we want to do, you mentioned it very well, Claire, that in 7 years, all of us are going to be meeting again and see what did we do, how would you actually report on this important framework. I think we need to include everyone. And from EMS serving African countries across our network, we have a privilege of testing, I think, the value chain, the data value chain that Prof. Samuel was talking about, taking that global framework to specific countries, mapping them up, but also providing the opportunity for countries to implement them based on their context, and then try to do that mapping to say, what are you learning? I think that's very important. But the way you do that is through multi-stakeholder partnership. That's very important. And the other point, I know all the strategic action are very important, but the other one that speaks a lot for what we are doing at EMS is really to mobilize resources and coordinate effort for statistical capacity building. Yes, capacity building have different definition. I got a point from Prof. Samuel. At EMS, what we're actually good at is really to build the technical capacity building, right? Turning statistician to data science is not a one day or a click of fingers, right? COVID-19 taught us big lessons. One of them was when we are in lockdown, how do you run countries? How do you report on this kind of indicators when you don't have a capacity of people who understand how data can actually be analyzed? So I think this framework provides those kind of very specific area of priority that we need to leverage. So for me, I think it's important to accelerate capacity building across the board to have a massive, a critical mass of people who can complement the work that statistical offices are doing in their country to really complement that analysis so that the user of data will not look at it as just traditional statistics, but also maybe telecom data or social media data and so on. What we have done, I will end by this, is to leverage the partnership with the global partnership to work on the data value project, which taught us a lesson to say, if you leverage partnership, you bring on board, for example, the private sector. So Claire, you mentioned this equation of $1 and over $30 for return to investment. How many people, how many private sector business leaders in Africa understand that? Why are we not getting those $1 to get that kind of impact? I think for me, it's important to bring them on board, but bring them on board not as traditional statistical users. Bring them on board to understand that they are playing with data in the sector. That is also equally important for us to advance sustainable development data. Another thing is the young people. At EMS, you mentioned my name is just mobilizing the the community of scientists. Young people have their own understanding of this thing that we're talking about. I think it's important as data user to also acknowledge that they might not actually understand things on the way we do, but we need to actually onboard them. We shouldn't exclude them. We need to unpack, simplify the way we actually produce those kind of analytics for them to also participate in this kind of initiative. Thanks.
Thank you so much to both of you. No, really, really interesting. I'd like to ask each of you, I think, a question similar to what I asked the first panel, and then perhaps we'll come back for a sort of final round of questions with everybody. But really, I think the way that it was very striking in the first panel, I think, when I asked them about the value of the framework and in the remarks that they gave, there was a real sense of ownership that the Cape Town Global Action Plan is something which is owned by the statistics community, by statisticians, of course, coming out of the World Data Forum and the Statistics Commission. I don't quite pick up that same sense from the two of you, that it is something which perhaps, is useful to you, but you don't have quite that same sense of ownership. So I guess I'm interested to know whether I'm hearing correctly in that, and whether that matters. Is it useful to you? Would it be useful to you to have a plan which you felt more ownership of, or is it actually more useful to you to have something which sets out clearly the priorities of the statistics community for you to then dock into as a slightly different category of partner? Andrea.
Well, I'm not so sure, to be honest. I think there are probably two ways to go forward, particularly also with the review. One would be to kind of open up that the Global Action Plan and make it more broad, kind of bring more actors on board and create that ownership. That might be quite complex because it will become quite broad and maybe lose in depth. So it might be less useful for the statistical community itself. If you don't do that, then I think we need some sort of bridging instruments. And I guess what we had with various things like the clearinghouse, or we had recently our Bern call to action, where we tried to translate, many things which are in the Global Action Plan to the development community. So if you don't do that, you kind of need some sort of bridging instruments. And also events and processes which brings those two communities closer together. So I'm a bit undecided. I think it's something which needs to be debated and to put forward as we move forward. But I think there needs to be an anchoring. I mean, there is sort of a growing recognition, and some of your work, Claire, has really helped to that in the development community of the importance of investment in data. And what we don't want is to spur a lot of activity which are totally disconnected, and because then we just have more fragmentation. So we really need to kind of have a plan how we bring that together. It might well be that it needs sort of separate instruments, but I think that bridging and sort of that understanding what the systemic sort of challenges of the data value chain is needs to be communicated beyond just the statistical community, because all those actors are part of the data ecosystem.
Thank you so much. I think this systems point is so critical. We've heard a lot, I think, already today about the data value chain, about systems. These are all different ways of describing the same thing, that we need to perhaps think about data not as the product, which we've been used to thinking about it as, but as the whole infrastructure and architecture of the system within which that data is produced and analysed and ultimately used and governed. It's a difficult thing to communicate easily and effectively, but I think that is the challenge really that all of you have crystallized in your different ways. So Charles, I think the same question to you, is it useful to have a plan which is owned by everybody? Or are we better off proceeding along the lines that Andrea suggested, the kind of docking stations rather than a single universal plan?
I would say it's a very complex question, by the way. I believe that the way I read that this plan is government will own them, so national statistics. But I will need to be very careful that owning it does not mean that they will be able to do it alone, right? So I think the focus should be like you own it, you try to map up what we are suggesting at this plan to your specific context. But for us to be able to achieve all these things, I think you need to recognize in a way that is very clear, for example, research and academic institution. How can you build capacity if you don't bring these people, if you don't recognize what they can do, not as government, for example, MC like a Pan-African institution. I think it's very important to spell it out so that there's a level of ownership per category or per priority. Prof. Samuel was talking about the data revolution in Ghana. Maybe they're gonna make it like a priority this year, but yes, it's just a big word. What does data revolution mean in countries? What does it take for us to implement that data revolution in countries? You need capacity. You need institutions that can help bring the expertise. Is that very clear there? Maybe not. Do we need to kind of make it separate? I don't know. But I believe it's important really to clarify it so that it's everyone, as you said, everyone should act. But role and responsibility in the implementation should be maybe more specific, I would say.
Thank you so much, really helpful. And I think we've got a great comment here in the chat here, I think, which I'd just like to highlight, that capacity building, as we're all talking about, should not be a one-time activity, but it has to take place in the context, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, in the context of thinking about institutional strengthening, so that that capacity has when it's built, has somewhere to go, in the sense of institutions that can support the continued use of new skills and to deliver improved data, stronger use of data, better data governance, and all of the things that ultimately are the things that are going to deliver change. So thank you so much. Before I come back to Ola for some closing words, I just wanted to invite our first panel back, Gabrielle, Diana and Samuel, just to reflect. If you're allowed perhaps 1 minute each, if you want to take it, to reflect on this conversation, and particularly perhaps having heard this and bearing in mind that Diana, you and other colleagues in the HLG will be going away and deliberating on these things. Is there one thing that you would like to offer as a specific suggestion to adapt, to improve the CT gap, to make it useful in all the ways that we've just been talking about today? Any particular order? Gabriella, do you want to start us off? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think, and this relates a bit to the ownership question that you asked, that the other parts of the data ecosystem, not the statistical part, but the other parts are very heterogeneous. The statistical world is much more homogeneous, so it's easier for us to identify uniformly or almost uniformly with a document like the CT gap. For the whole data ecosystem, it's much more difficult because it may resonate for some parts of it, may resonate for some actors, but probably not the whole to all actors. But I think what we could maybe aim at is to improve and to make our contacts with the other data ecosystem partners more close, and maybe they should formulate a document that calls to us, because currently we formulated a document that calls them for partnership. And maybe if they formulated one that opens up to statistics, and that could probably bring us more closer together and could build much more partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. So interesting. Professor, over to you.
Thank you once again. Just one word, measurement. I mean, we talked about this. We're talking about harmonization, coordination, partnership. We are a statistical community, and the only way we should do things is how we measure these things so that over time we can see what we are doing in terms of progress. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor. Wise words as always. Diana.
Thank you. Well, as I said in my intervention, I do believe that the action plan is one that continues to be relevant. Countries such as mine stand to benefit a great deal by aligning our own strategic planning to a document such as this, where the themes are, as I said, universally applicable to our field. I think one thing, and we had this discussion in our last meeting of the HLG, is that we need to also be able to sell the importance of this strategy and implementing this strategy, not just within us as a statistical community, but to those out there who control the resources. You know, even the best of strategic plans will not be effective if we don't have the resources to implement them. And so I think it is very important that communication be a part of the CT gap going forward. Perhaps incorporated into the strategic priority that deals with mobilizing resources for implementation, and ensuring that we can communicate to the ones who control the resources that we need to implement, not just why it's important to produce good data, but what the data can do for them, and to sell it to them and to sell it to the public that stand to benefit from all these better decisions and the better data that we're trying to produce. So there's one thing that I would want to see incorporated, is the thing that we discussed in our last HLG meeting. It's communication and boosting our ability to sell this strategy to the ones that really matter.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly helpful. I mean, I think, you know, what we're talking about here is really a number of different jobs, isn't it, that we want collectively to be able to do, not that the single action plan has to be able to do all jobs. But of course, one is really important, was talked about by Gabriella, by Professor Anim, the role of having a global action plan that can really help to mobilize action, a sort of common set of actions, and provide validation, provide political cover when it's needed sometimes, just to chief statisticians to set their agendas, do their jobs, translate it into the kind of political strategies that align with national priorities and so on. But in a sense, to provide a sort of common framework to build that community, to really underpin that community of statisticians and those who support them, which you know, of which we are all a part. Then the second one, of course, is to provide a kind of docking station and a way of enabling partnerships and specifically guidance to those partners outside of the statistical system, but who increasingly have a role in supporting statisticians to do their jobs, and working together to achieve some of the changes that we all want to see. So there, I think we have to think, you know, as several of you have talked about, you know, how other plans and strategies and priorities can fit into a new or revised version of the Cape Town Action Plan. And then I think the two things that really need to underpin both, as Diana said, communication, mobilization. We need to be able to talk about this and pull in some of those actors, those with resources, those with political power, those whom in some way or another are absolutely vital to the mission but are not part of this service. And as Professor Enim said, we need measurement. We need something which allows us to track our own progress, to hold ourselves accountable and be held accountable by the wider community. So I think all of that's a hard job for those of you in the HLG who have the task of going away and thinking about this. And now, to wrap us up, let me turn back to you, Ola, as the co-chair of the HLG, to summarize and perhaps talk a little bit about the next steps. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Claire. It was really very interesting session and very interesting interventions, and really good thoughts to be considered. I may just take out of what we have, we came up with that the global perspective of the Cape Town Global Action Plan is still a reference and essential tool for all, and shall remain relevant to its global stakeholder base. Yes, we have a growing amount of different actors, and this has to be taken into consideration. As we heard, more measurable and time-specific language of the city gap should be introduced. We see the importance to reflect the current context in which talking about data and statistics operate, measured, implemented, and communicate. especially also when we talk about the mobilization and the part of financing of it. The session also highlighted areas of the Cape Town Global Action Plan where implementation remained a priority, talking about the lack of broader framework for data privacy and protection, growing priority for additional coordination in the data ecosystem between the stakeholders. I also most of the speakers mentioned the importance of the capacity development, and the new multi-stakeholder partnership is of a great priority, and the need for better certainty over the timings and the levels of budgets for data revolutions in the perspective of mobilization. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ola. Thank you all to our fantastic speakers, to the many participants that I see on the screen. Thank you also very much to the team from UNSD who brought us all here, Ian, Francesca and Paul. If you'd like to switch your cameras on so that we can all say thanks to you properly, you're most welcome. But it really has been a fantastic, really stimulating discussion. I think we've all come away from our various perspectives with a huge amount to think about. So thank you all to our speakers who've given us such excellent food for thought, and to the organisers, and especially to all of you for listening. Thank you very, very much, and looking forward to the next time.